everyone, welcome to the HeyHannah Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mya Fields, but to my friends and those who know me well, I'm just Mya. I'm a higher education administrator, a mother, and a wife of 14 amazing years, but above all, I'm a Christ follower. This podcast is a special platform created to honor the memory of my beloved daughter, Hannah. It's here that I have the chance to have the conversations that I never got to have with her, to share the wisdom and love I wish I could have passed on. It's a reminder to cherish the precious moments we're given and a testament to the power of healing, hope, and personal growth. If you're someone who's seeking personal growth, inspiration, and practical advice to build a solid foundation for a successful and fulfilling life, this is the place for you. Join me as we honor Hannah's memory together. Laugh, cry, and learn. Get ready for a podcast that is so much more than you could ever imagine. The HeyHannah Podcast. Healing hearts, one conversation at a time. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the HeyHannah Podcast. We are so glad that you decided to take some time to join us again today. You will not be disappointed. We have author and coach Julie Lowe with us here today. She has written a new book, A Few Good Habits, that she's going to tell us about because we want to maximize our results, right? We want to be as effective as we can. Julie is here to help us with that. And let me tell you, I just got to see a little snippet of the book. Julie, I was telling her, she comes out the gate swinging. Like you can tell she's laying down some good advice here in this book. So we definitely are glad that we get to have a little sneak peek because we have a little time with her here today. So Julie, thank you for joining us. Tell us.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Absolutely. So tell us, the book is coming out early October. Tell us about it. Like, how did you get to the point where you're saying like, hey, I need to write this book. This is what the world needs from me right now.
Yeah, it really kind of came to the point where two things. Number one, I felt like everything, I think for everybody, kind of came to a head in 2020. For
sure.
me, stress and anxiety really came to a head.
Yeah.
I've always dealt a lot with anxiety pretty much my whole life. I was a worrywart kid, so something I've always kind of dealt with. But with all the stresses of the pandemic and the kids being home for a year doing virtual school and, it's enough, right, to break anybody. And it kind of came to a head and I was like, okay, I got to get this figured out. Like there are people out there that are high performers that have figured this out, that are super productive and really chasing their dreams, getting stuff done and enjoying their lives even when things are stressful. Mm-hmm. And so I really kind of went on this search because I was like, okay, somebody's got to have the answers. I always believe there's an answer out there, right? I'm not the only person in the world that's ever dealt with this. So being the maybe a bit of a crazy high achiever I am, instead of just grabbing another book, because I'd already been doing personal development work for years, I dove into this 9-month-long coaching certification program because, of course, that's what you do when you're overwhelmed, right? You join this huge coaching certification program. But I really felt like, okay, maybe the coaches have the answers. Yep. And so I went on this search. And over the past couple of years, I've learned so much. I've taken that certification. I've taken a high performance one. I even studied neuroscience with a neuroscientist, Shante Joan Taylor, and learned all this stuff. And it really felt like at this point, I had a better handle on things. Yeah. My stress and anxiety were under control. But along the way, two things. Number one, it shouldn't have taken so long and it shouldn't have taken so much money to figure this stuff out. And I really want this stuff to be more accessible. And I was so tired of all the bad advice out there. So you said I came out swinging in the intro. It was because I was like, okay, this nonsense has to stop. This bad advice where it's either just completely impractical, especially for like a working mom, or it's so complex, or it's like some 20-step morning routine that I'm like, who has time for this stuff? Right. And so I just was like, this is nonsense. Like, I really want to put something together that combines like what all I've learned in a way that's just uncomplicated, common sense, no nonsense, that people can actually use. Because what good is all this advice if we can't actually implement it in a realistic way?
Right. Absolutely. You made a great point. Like there's so many things out here and it's served as a resource, but it's like 3,000 steps.
Yeah.
I'm already telling you I don't have any time. So how am I going to implement the 3,000 steps? So I like
Yeah.
that you're saying your approach is realistic and it's doable for, working moms or just individuals who are busy. That's
Mhm.
important. That's the key factor. Like we need it to work and we need to be doable. So you said you did a lot of work before in the personal growth, like development space. Can you tell us a little bit about your background in that area and the type of individuals you helped and the services that you offered?
Yeah, in terms of what I've been doing before, it was mostly honestly self-study and taking courses and things as an entrepreneur because I really believe entrepreneurship is one of the biggest, personal development journeys you could go on. You really kind of have to do your work, I think, if you're going to be an entrepreneur because it's like your stuff is going to come up, there's going to be challenges.
Yeah.
Well, I'd already been doing a lot of work, just on my own for my own purposes for so many years and mostly mindset work.
Yeah.
And then really whenever I kind of came to that point in 2020, I started diving into everything from NLP to EFT, different coaching modalities, really thinking honestly that the solution to my problem was going to be better mindset. Because
Yeah.
okay, I'm doing some stuff, but it's not working. Let me
Hmm.
keep working on that. Because I honestly thought stress, anxiety, I thought it's a mindset problem or something in your head, right? That you just
Yeah.
need to think your thoughts and I just got to get this dialed in. Honestly, where it kind of took me though was I was ignoring the physical half of the equation because I really just thought of stress and anxiety as a mental exercise. And what I
Hmm.
really kind of came to learn was if you're ignoring your body and the fact that stress is a nervous system response, you're ignoring a big part of the problem.
Yeah.
And that's really kind of when I went down the route of learning about, nervous system regulation and the neuroscience behind like, well, okay, what's happening like really on a whole body level whenever we're stressed, when we're anxious, and how can we get better control of this? And then funny enough, that led me to high performance, this study of stress. I had always, you think like, oh, you're stressed, become a high performer. That doesn't make
Right.
sense. It seems like a disconnect there. People will ask me like, wait, you were stressed, so you went there? Like, makes no sense. But what I really realized is that what it means to be a high performer is that you're successful, you're achieving, but you're not doing it at the expense of your health and your relationships. That's the definition of a high performer is somebody that has that success,
Uh-huh.
not burning out along the way. So if you're rocking it at work, but you're burning out at home and dropping the ball, you might be a high achiever, but you're not a high performer. And that's really the distinction. And I realized a lot of the traits that high performers have really are some of the same things that I've been learning from the neuroscience and the stress. They're doing things in a way that they're not burning themselves out.
Yeah.
It's the habits that really kind of help you maintain both areas of your life.
Oh, I never heard it explained that way. Um, so are you telling us that there are people who are essentially doing all things well? Like they're kicking butt at home, they're kicking butt at work, they're kicking butt as a parent, they're kicking butt as a volunteer. Like, do those people exist? Is that what you're saying?
I think to a degree, but I think what we have to take out of the equation is some idea that they are perfect or nailing it, completely nailing it. It's not like we, can ever be on full, all cylinders on all areas of the life 24/7. Like, I just don't think that's necessarily something we need to strive for. But to me, what it really means is that we're showing up with intention in
Okay.
all of those areas and that we're not just working, working, working at the expense of everything else. I think that's when we get really out of balance. Yeah, so it doesn't mean that it looks completely perfect all the time, but what I really came to realize is that I've always had this really strong work ethic and this drive to do well and, chase my dreams and be successful. I wasn't applying those same attitudes and intentions, I think, to my personal life, to my health, to my relationships, as I was to my career. And I realized that was really incongruent. I was really out of step in that way. And I wasn't applying the same standards to all areas of my life. So it's not necessarily about like having it all being perfect or anything like that, but it's like, are you showing up with intention and purpose
I got
and
you.
really bringing your best self to all areas? That's to me what the distinction is for a high performer.
Absolutely. And it makes a lot of sense. It reminds me, back in my early 20s, I had an opportunity. I was working in the finance industry at the time, and I had an opportunity to be a general manager at this location I was going to be working at. And so I was so nervous. I'm like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? I was always able to, do well, typically, get a job. I'm able to perform very well. That wasn't a problem, but I guess I was just nervous because it's like my first major leadership. And now I'm not
Mhm.
just responsible for me, it's like other people. And so I remember talking to this gentleman who had been a manager much longer than me. And I was just like, oh, I'm so nervous. I don't know if I can do this. And he gave me this advice. And I think about this all the time. It was so simple. I don't even know if he realizes how profound it was. He was like, Maya, all you have to do is care. He's like, that's half of the battle. He
Mm.
said, if you give, he used choice language. So I'll just say, if you just give a darn about what you're doing,
Mhm.
you're going to be fine. He's like, that's half the battle. And I think about that all the time with a lot of stuff because I think in our minds, we can automatically assume that the people that we're viewing are firing on all cylinders in every area of their lives.
Yeah.
And, it's true. If you just care about
Mhm.
what you're doing, the people you're showing up for, the people you're interacting with, you're going to make a world of difference. So I love that. It just reminded me when you said, what are high performers? That's true. If you just care, just show up
Mhm.
with intention. I love that. So good stuff. Thank you for telling us that. That's so true. Um, so I noticed in a lot of your work, you talk about toxic hustle culture. So we want to be high performers, but you don't want us to hustle. Tell us what do we need to do?
Right. I think the distinction for me between being a high performer and the toxic hustle culture is again, it's how we're coming about it and the intention that we're bringing to it. When I was coming up in my business in 2013, Gary Vee was very popular.
Yeah.
I hear he's kind of switched his ways a bit, but especially back then, it was sort of like, you can sleep when you die. Like if you're not, working yourself to the point of exhaustion, you must not want it enough and you can't cut it and like you're in the wrong business sort of a thing.
Yeah.
And it was really this idea of like if you were not running yourself into the ground and working nonstop at the expense of everything else, then you must not want it bad enough.
Yeah.
And I think that's really been perpetuated, this idea of like not just hard work, but like working to a breaking point is required. And I just don't think that's the case. Like I said, I've always had, strong work ethic. I grew up on a farm and blue collar kind of community where it's very much like hard work was revered and you better not be lazy. That was about the worst thing you could be. And so I do believe in hard work, but I don't think it has to be at the expense of everything else. And the other thing about hustle culture is I think sometimes we almost use this hustle and this constant busyness as a coping mechanism. Like we just don't know how to be and how to rest and how to take time for ourselves. And we end up feeling guilty for it. We end up feeling guilty for doing self care, for getting a good night's sleep and really, just taking some time off of work. And I think that's when it becomes toxic and more like hustle culture and less like high performance and like putting in the work. We do have to put in the work for sure. I don't believe we're just going to like magically manifest everything with our wishes and our hopes. Like I think we have to put in the work. And if we're not really taking care of ourselves, then we are going to burn out
Yeah.
and we're not going to be performing at our best because we need that balance. We need that time for rest and recovery to really be fully functional and thriving and not just like getting by.
Absolutely. It's almost like we wear busyness these days as a badge of honor. Like you
For
don't
sure.
want to you want to open up your calendar and be booked and busy. You don't want anyone to see you like, I don't have anything to do. It's like, I'm ashamed.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things. I completely get that. Just culturally, it's kind of celebrated to be so
Hmm.
busy and have all these things going on, but we do need rest. We do need um, you know, relaxation. We do need to just give ourselves some time to recoup. It reminds me, I heard, and I don't know how far this has spread nationwide, but there's been some more of an acceptance or more of a push in our K through 12 school system with allowing mental health days and
Hmm.
for students. So they have those days where it's like, I'm not really physically sick, but I just need a break. There's a break that I need here, and I recognize that, and I'm able to take that day. And I think it's so important because it starts young, learning how to advocate for rest for yourself. And so
Yeah.
I think it's great that they're teaching our children that, like, hey, start young. You need a mental health day, take it.
Mhm.
Um, so let me ask you this because you're a longtime entrepreneur. How are you received amongst your peers when you're telling them, we need to dial it back a bit with the amount of work? Because I feel like you mentioned Gary Vee, and not just him. It's plenty of other people who have
Yeah.
that same mentality, like
Yeah.
work, work, work. You want to take a nap, you don't really want to be successful. That's, kind of the common thread between individuals who are entrepreneurs. So how do you how are you received in the entrepreneur community amongst your peers, and how do you get them to listen a bit to where they can be receptive to your message and how it's going to ultimately benefit them?
Yeah, I mean, some people obviously take it better than others. I think whenever you really look at the science behind it, I think that's what can really make the difference for a lot of people. For me, I love to see like the research behind things and really how things are working, in terms of the neurobiology. And I think that helps a lot of times when you can actually point to a study and go like, look, if you never take a break during the day, for example, if you just work nonstop all day with no breaks, your brain is not going to be functioning optimally. So if you really care about the quality of your work and you want to be sharp and you really want to get things done in a great way, the science says that your brain just can't stay at its highest level without any breaks. And you're
Yeah.
actually going to be more productive, more creative if you take even just small, like a 2-minute break every once in a while, every hour or 2 hours tops. But every 60 to 90 minutes, ideally, you need to get up, you need to move around, you need to get a drink of water and just take a breath. And you're
Yeah.
actually going to be more productive, more creative, more effective if you do that. And there's tons of research to back it up. So sometimes it's really kind of looking at the science of like, I know you think you can go all day and really still be at your best, but let's look at the research on it, right? Because, we can kind of be biased in how we think we're performing. So really sometimes it's pointing to the science behind things, and that really can help. And, everybody wants to perform better. But I do think that sometimes people look at productivity and they think like, I'll just find some hack, some technique, something to make me more productive, more efficient. And usually it's with the goal of not just getting more and more done, it's with the goal of like, if I can do that,
Yeah.
then I could have time for my family. I could have time for self care. I could go to the gym, whatever. But I really feel like when we're just trying to like hack our time, we just get more efficient at burning ourselves out.
Yeah.
We just end up cramming more and more into our day. We don't stop working earlier. We just keep working, cram more stuff into our day, and then we're still not doing the things to take care of ourselves. So if somebody's like, you know what, it's really, really important to me that I excel at what I do, well, look at top athletes. They're training, they're getting coaching, they're taking really good care of their physical health because they know they're going to be at the top of the game if they do that. I think the same applies to entrepreneurs. We can't just ignore our bodies and think that we're going to have the energy and the vitality to be top performers. So That's usually kind of the argument I make.
Well, you make a lot of great points. I myself love to look at the data, like what does it say? Because I feel like that's what the studies are done for, especially
Mhm.
good quality studies. And you don't have to make all the mistakes yourself. Let's go see
Yeah.
what these other people have researched and what
Yeah.
they've come up with and use that knowledge to, be better in the future. What type of data informed practices are you seeing start to take place in the world of business and entrepreneurship? Do you see any changes that are starting to be implemented as a result of what we see in the data?
I think some. I mean, because high performance research has been around at least for a decade or more at this point. Brendon Burchard, that's where I got my certification, was through his High Performance Institute. He's been doing research for more than a decade now. And there's other groups as well. So I do believe it's becoming a little bit more mainstream. I think that sometimes, we kind of go in the wrong direction, and people at organizations will just bring in like some sort of wellness plan, but it's like a one off thing, right? Where it's like, we're going to do yoga for a day or like whatever, right? And so it's not really fully integrated into the culture. And so I think the big thing that I would love to see is, how do we make this a culture in the company that we're instituting high performance practices, and it's an ongoing thing? Because with any self-care, it's like brushing your teeth. You can't do it once and you're good, or like once a quarter or something. It has to be every day. And that's how all these practices are. We have to keep them up on a regular basis, and it has to be something that's widely accepted, and I think modeled well by leadership. Because if leadership is saying like, yeah, we want you to have work-life balance, and we want you to do self-care, but they're not modeling it, if they're available 24/7 and working 50, 60-hour weeks, the employees are going to see that, and they're going to believe they need to do that too if they want to be successful. And it's just showing up. I read a study the other day. It was something over 80% of workers said they were burned out in the past year. It's a very recent study that just came out in 2023, and it was like 83% or something of workers are burned out. And I think part of the shift in the pandemic, where we started these more flexible schedules, we started schedules where a lot of people are working from home. In a lot of ways, it's done a lot of good for people. It's made us rethink things. It also blurs the lines, right?
Yeah.
So people never know when they can stop working. They feel like they have to be available all the time, always reachable. And especially when you work from home, it can bleed into the evening, right? It's hard to stop working. So I feel like it's really time to take a look at that and make sure that we have boundaries in place and we have structure in place, or people are just going to burn out faster, even though and they have this quote unquote flexibility.
Absolutely. And I definitely agree with you. It starts with leadership and creating a culture that is supportive of work life. I like to say work life harmony.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
kind of intertwining them all together. One of the things that made me think of, I was talking to someone about, how you're creating this culture as a leader, and they were sending an email, and the email was sent at like 11 or 12 o'clock. And I was like, well, you shouldn't send this email at 11 or 12 o'clock, because even though, and their argument was, I'm not saying they have to work till 11 to 12, but inadvertently, you're sending the
Mhm.
message that the boss works at 11 or 12. So, if you want to
Yeah.
climb the chain, you should be too. And so I think leadership has to be conscious of that as well. Like, what type of culture are you setting? Like, not with just with your mouth, but
Mhm.
with your actions. So if you decide like, hey, I perform best at 11 o'clock at night, do an auto send, to where it
Mhm.
comes out at 8 o'clock in the morning. But you do want to make sure that you are creating a culture that definitely values and celebrates, um, being able to recover. I will say you do have your work cut out for you though in this space, because I think we really got, there was a lot of obviously awful things that came along with the pandemic, but one thing that we did get to see is just a real view into the thoughts of leadership when it comes to how important productivity is. We saw people who were, you got to get back in the office. I feel like you're going to be more productive I heard so many things about people who were working remotely and the type of things that their employers require, like be on camera the whole time you're working remote, like all these things to make sure that
Mhm.
you are productive enough, because God forbid you go to the bathroom more than 5 minutes. And so I say that to say, Julie, I mean, you are obviously very well versed in this space, but you have your work cut out for you. So book one is coming out in October, but you need to be working on 2, 3, and 4 because this, the cultural shift is definitely a heavy lift.
Yeah.
So back to the book. Tell me, like, how is it organized? What can we expect to get by taking, the precious time that we already don't have to read the book? Like, what are we getting out of it?
Yeah. Yeah, and I will say it is a quick read. It's only about 250 pages. It's one of those things, yeah, you could read it in a weekend or something, honestly, because I really did want to make it something that people could, like I said, practically implement and not take forever and ever to read or get through.
For sure.
And it's, I think, pretty fun read too. But the way I went about it is the first part of the book is really like, let's take a look at the things that we maybe have been taught, the things that are kind of ingrained in our culture that we think is going to reduce our stress or we think is going to make us a high performer. But let's call BS on it. Because, like I said, there's so much bad advice out there.
Yeah.
It's everything from like, you just got to use motivation and willpower and grit to get your goals. I call BS on that one, to kind of looking at hustle culture and that difference between a high performer and a high achiever. So I really kind of dig into like, okay, what do you maybe think is the way to get this stuff done that's not serving you? So
Yeah.
that's kind of how I kick things off. And then I say like, okay, let's pause, let's take a look at the reality, how you're performing, what you're going after, what your goals are, and really make sure we're starting out knowing where we stand. Because sometimes we have this idea of how things are going in our life, and it's just not reality.
Yeah.
So a bit of a reality check there in the middle. And then I dive into the habits. And there's only 4 habits.
4?
Like I
We
said,
do
I did
4?
not want to make this complicated. I really focused on 4 habits that are going to give you the biggest bang for your buck. So instead of trying to have this 20-step plan and completely overhauling your life and like trying to do all the things, which is what I think most of us try to do,
Yeah.
I just focus on 4 habits. And
Okay.
honestly, they're common sense things, but I find they're not always common practice. So it's the kind of thing that sometimes you're like, yeah, I know that. But then, like, are you doing it? So I really kind of take a look at like, okay, here's the 4 habits and break them down and why. Why are these things important? Why are they things that you hear time and time again? And really kind of dig into the things that really made it click for me as a high achiever. Like, okay, yeah, I know I should be doing this stuff, but I'm not. So, what's it going to take to convince me that this is important to me and make this happen? And then I really get into like how to make it happen. So, at the end, like, so it's not overwhelming. So, it becomes very practical. Here's the, I don't want to say tips and tricks, but kind of like the secrets or the really keys to success to making habits stick and how to go about it so that you're not just kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall and winging it. Like, here's the habits to focus on. Here's the one I would start with. And then here's the tips and tricks to really make it happen so that you can have progress and start changing your life. But they're really high impact habits that are going to have that trickle down effect in your whole life.
Okay, so basically you're giving us the secret sauce for success. Is that what
Yeah.
I'm hearing? Okay,
Yeah.
I like that. I want to circle back around because you said something that was intriguing to me, about it's not just grit, it's not just willpower, to move forward and achieve, whatever it is that you are trying to achieve. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because I feel like, especially the grit, it just took off and caught fire. And there
Mhm.
was such a conversation around individuals who, if you're not succeeding enough, do you have enough grit? Are you really digging in?
Mhm.
So can you give us some dialogue on the other side of that conversation? Because I think it's very much needed. We've heard so much about not having enough grit is the reason you're not able to be productive. But what's your take on it's not just those things that require you to meet your goals?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to the fact that willpower, motivation, grit, whichever you want to call it, they are limited resources. and they don't last forever. And so that's why I think a lot of like New Year's resolutions, for example, by the time I say in the book, by the time Girl Scout cookie season rolls around in like February, we've forgotten our resolutions, right?
Yeah.
And it's just because they're limited resources. And a lot of times they're based on emotions, which can change. And so I think if we're just trying to grit our way through, it's just not going to last in the long term. Like, yeah, you have to have some motivation, of course. Like, I'm not saying they're not important at all, but it's really going to help you get started. It's not necessarily going to help you maintain.
Yeah.
So if you really want to be successful, more than just motivation or grit, you need a plan. And again, we can go back to science on this one. This has been proven out time and time again that motivation has way less of an impact as a solid plan. And the thing is, it doesn't have to be complicated. We think we have to have these complex, schedules and plans and things to make things work. But there was actually this one study that was done where they gave people a challenge to exercise on a regular basis. And they had 3 control groups on this, or 3 groups, I should say. And they had a control group, which all they did was they said, hey, track your exercise for a week, period. And then the second group, they used motivation. They told them why it was important, how it was going to help them, how it's going to be good for their health, and so on and so forth. And then the third group, they did the motivation stuff with them too, but then they had them create a really simple plan. Just, I will exercise for 20 minutes on this day and this time, right? Just a plan. And really straightforward. It's not like it was something, just super complex. And what they found was that motivation had 0 impact on whether or not people actually worked out. They performed exactly the same as the control group. Yeah, about 30% of people actually worked out in the control group and the motivation group. But the group that had that super simple plan, I'm going to work out 20 minutes a week on these 2 days, 93% of them, it was over 90%, actually performed. So it's 3 times as many people.
My goodness.
Actually got things done. And the researchers literally said motivation had 0 effect on the outcome because they were the same as the control group. And of course, that's not the only study. There have been more studies. Yeah. It's one of those things where we can look at this simple example and go like, you would think that the motivation would help because you now like why it's important to you. But in reality, it's not enough for us to take action. Or I think a lot of times we take action for a little bit and then life happens, the kids get sick or work gets really busy or like whatever it is, the holidays are coming up.
Yeah.
And the motivation falls by the wayside because other things take priority. But just having that really simple plan is going to triple your odds of success. So I'm like, well, why rely on something that may or may not help me when I have this really dead simple way of making things happen that I know is going to triple my odds of success? So really just kind of giving people the science behind it and those better options that are so simple, where if we plan, and then if we also plan for what am I going to do when life happens? Yeah. Because it's going to happen. What am I going to do instead? If you have that initial plan and then you have an if-then plan of if this happens, then this is what I'm going to do.
I like that.
Your odds of success are just so much higher. So let's just, forget about relying on things that are just proven even not to work, but sound good. Yeah. And use stuff that we know is going to help.
That's awesome. You gave us so many gems. Julie, I could just keep talking to you. I really am interested in that study because that's so cool. You think like, oh, you're really doing something by cheering people on, and the study says you're not. They need a plan. So tell us, how can we find you? Where can we follow you on social media and keep track with what you're doing?
Yeah. So my website is coachjulielowe.com, and then all of my social handles are Coach Julie Lowe. So that's the best way to find me. And you can find the book on my website. If you're listening to this before the book comes out on October 5th, you can go read a chapter for free. And actually, I'm going to keep that on my site. So you can always go there if you want to check it out, see if it's for you or not, read that chapter for free. And then on October 5th, the book will be available on Amazon for purchase.
Exciting. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I learned a lot. Guest, I hope you learned a lot too, because she definitely gave us some gems. We end every episode with the same question. So can you give us one piece of life-changing advice that you have received?
I think the thing that stuck with me the most over these past couple of years is really that idea of bringing more intention to everything that you do. Because
Mhm.
like I said, when I looked at it, I realized it brings so much intention and so much effort and so much, really focus to my career. And I was letting things slide in my personal life. And there's nothing that we do in our jobs where we think like, oh, it'll just work itself out and I don't need to figure that out or focus on it or whatever.
Mhm.
We don't do that in our jobs, but then we do that so often in our personal lives. And when we do that, our relationships suffer. Our family feels taken for granted, and our health can really start slip sliding, especially if we are under a lot of stress with our work. So, really, sort of the biggest thing for me has been bring that same intention and focus to your personal life that you bring to your career as a high achiever. And that's when everything really, I think, starts to get better because that effort, that focus, it is needed. And it's really just going to lift all areas of your life. It's not just going to improve your personal life, it is going to improve your professional life as well. So just bring that intention and bring more of yourself to all that you do.
That is very true. It's kind of like a gut punch, but you said it so nicely. Like, why are you showing up everywhere? But it's true. You really
Yeah.
do. You can't just take a back seat in any area. So I get that.
Yeah.
Thank you again for joining us. We greatly appreciate it. This has been another great episode where we got to learn a bunch of stuff from Julie. So we appreciate you taking the time to join us. Thank you, everyone, again for tuning in. And until next time, take care. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the HeyHannah Podcast. We hope that you found inspiration, insight, and encouragement in our conversation today. If you enjoyed this episode and want to stay connected with us, be sure to like, subscribe, and review the HeyHannah Podcast. Your feedback helps us reach more people and spread our message of love and wisdom. You can also follow us on social media at HeyHannah Podcast. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok to stay updated on all the latest episodes, behind-the-scenes exclusives, and engaging content. And for those of you who prefer the visual experience, catch the video versions of our podcast on our YouTube channel. Just search HeyHannah Podcast and hit that subscribe button to never miss an episode. For even more HeyHannah goodness, visit our website at www.heyhannahpodcast.com. There you'll find updates, bonus content, and join a community that embraces you with open arms. Your continued support truly means the world to us. Together, let's spread love, share wisdom, and honor every precious moment. Because here at HeyHannah, we believe that life is meant to be lived well. Remember, a new episode of the HeyHannah Podcast is released every Wednesday, so mark your calendars and be sure to tune in. Thank you again for being a part of Hannah's Hive. Until next time, take care.
entertainment.